very much for that warm introduction. It's absolutely fabulous to be here at Risk 4.0 and at Abu Dhabi Finance Week. I use this clicker? Thank you. So I'm Simon Hales, and I'm head of Edelman Smithfield Middle East. We're part of the largest communications firm in the world, Edelman, and I specialize in helping financial firms with their PR, their communications, their investor relations, and often in crisis communications too. I'm based in Abu Dhabi. I've lived here for 4 years. Abu Dhabi is our regional HQ, and we work here for many government departments. We actually work for ADGM and do the communications for Abu Dhabi Finance Week. We work for sovereign wealth funds, large listed entities on the ADX, and lots of growing firms too. We also help multinational companies come into the region and to establish their reputation here. So we're very much part of telling the story of Abu Dhabi's financial strength to the world. And I've worked in PR for 23 years now, and I've often been at the forefront of some quite negative front-page news. So I was previously head of media at Barclays Group in London, and I was also chief press officer at the BBC. Prior to that, I was a government spin doctor as well. So you could say that my career has either been one long crisis or one long succession of crises. But I'm actually very lucky to have done a lot of crisis communications because it's what I do for a living, and it's good for our business, advising firms on how to keep their reputations safe. Or you could say I'm actually very unlucky because perhaps I'm a bit of a magnet for bad news. So maybe you can make up your own minds by the end of this talk. Now, they say that for any CEO, there are 3 kinds of stakeholders that can make you lose your job if a crisis occurs. It could be your investors, if you're not performing. It could be the regulators, if you do something wrong. And it could be the media, who are going to try and get you out of your job, no matter what you do. And lots of examples that I've worked on over my career relate to those stakeholders and how they interact. So on the left, examples of business crises, dealing with an activist investor situation, someone who wants to come and disrupt or break up the business, sometimes dealing with allegations of CEO impropriety, both in their private life and their professional life, or even worse, both at the same time, sometimes handling a big boardroom bust-up and change in CEO leadership, which can disrupt a business. Crisis can occur from external events as well. I've worked on handling a cyber attack in a very large bank, or a banking outage when the app goes down and your social media networks are going crazy, or major events like COVID, which really disrupt business. They can be based on social factors, so people saying things that cause great harm and an offense. And in the geopolitical world that we're in and the pace in which social media moves, that can turn in an instant. Or sometimes having environmental protesters literally abseiling down your building and press releasing photos of themselves doing it. And finally, also relevant for risk managers here, legal risks as well. So dealing with regulatory fines, conduct issues, sometimes criminal trials, arrest, even conviction. I previously handled a very high-profile case by the Serious Fraud Office in the High Court. And the mother of all crises that we had at Barclays, which was the LIBOR rigging scandal in 2012. And that was so large, it cost the CEO and the chairman their jobs, was front page of the news for 17 days running, and it actually took the bank 10 years to rebuild its reputation and to rebuild trust again. It was a huge effort, and part of today is talking about how to avoid those issues so that they don't affect your business. So at Edelman, we provide crisis handling support. We can stand up teams immediately if there is an issue to come in and help, give you a strategy for how to handle a crisis communications issue, put in place the content and the execution to brief the media, your social media channels, messages to colleagues, messages to regulators, government stakeholders, and also use the live tracking and dashboards so that you're in control of the situation and you can see how you're returning back to normal. But really the main part about today is about before a crisis occurs, because actually, as risk managers, it's all about preparation. Preparation is the key. And for people in the room, people who are managing risk, chief risk officers, people who are often pricing risk, I feel in organizations, it's actually quite rare the chief comms officer talks to the chief risk officer. But the more those two people in those roles understand each other and put themselves in each other's shoes, the more prepared a business can get. So here's an example of a firm and the types of risks, reputation risks, that may occur, that may come up, and you'll be familiar with matrices like this, where you're looking at both the severity of an incident and the likelihood that it's going to occur, and then you can prioritize how to manage each one accordingly. But what's interesting from a reputation perspective is the way in which the news agenda changes. So if you're a risk manager and you're plotting the risks of the organization, it's actually very, very difficult to know what's going to be in the news tomorrow or next week and how that's going to affect your business. So it's really, really important to have the chief communications officer or an advisory team like Edelman at your risk management table and informing you about what's going on in the outside world and that trend analysis. It's also important that you might not just have one crisis, you might have more than one going on at the same time. And when I was at Barclays and the BBC, we'd often have 5, 6, 7 crises going on at the same time, and you'd be judging which one is causing the most damage, the interplay between them, interconnected crisis, and how they're playing around the world. So having a constant map on this is really key. A second thing is that if you're not doing it already, I think it's important to have reputation risk as a formal risk that's reported in the business. And one thing we did at Barclays was make that a formal requirement, and it meant there was a reputation risk committee reporting to the board so that reputation risk can be considered at the highest level. And that's actually a brilliant mechanism because it really helps the business to make smart decisions well ahead of an issue, and it helps the communications team to inform them of it in advance. So looking at the types of things we do to help companies prepare, we do a lot of crisis communications simulation, and that ranges from initially scenario planning, look at what risks might be out there, maybe some risks that you haven't thought of and how they could hurt a business. We do webcasts, online training modules for your team, right through to live tabletop exercises and live crisis simulations where we get your executive team in a room and we play the role of journalists and we put them in situations, and it's very useful because it really throws up questions, particularly about what they're going to say to the media, who does that, and how do they manage that accordingly. And also it's important to make sure that your CEO, or maybe it's not your CEO, another spokesperson in a crisis situation, is media trained, and will come in for a half day or full day and walk them through many different types of techniques. Firstly, messaging techniques, drawing on some skills from the emergency services or the world of politics on how to maintain control in a crisis situation. We do a lot of practical interview rehearsal, playing the role of journalists, simulating broadcast interviews, print interviews, even being ambushed by the press, and also importantly looking things like body language. What are your eyes, your hands, and your voice doing when you're on camera? Because often that can tell a lot more about a business's confidence in a crisis situation than the words that they say. We also then have a range of crisis communications manuals that help a business to really understand, are you dealing with something that's just a small issue that can be handled or a systemic crisis for the business? How do you escalate that? How do you stand up a crisis leadership team, business operational teams, and extra communication support to handle it? We have mechanisms for how to structure this, and I think really crucial, having your comms lead at the table alongside the chief of staff and the crisis leadership team, also slightly separate from day-to-day business operations so that they can continue as normal. And what you'll find in all of these crisis situations, whether it's a simulation or a real-world issue, the question very quickly comes, the first question is always, how do we fix this problem? But within about 5 minutes, the questions become, what do we say to the press? What are we going to put on social media? Do we need to tell the regulator? Do we need to have our messages consistent, or do we tailor them for different audiences? Has anyone thought about talking to colleagues? Because what if one of them is speaking at an event like this and they get doorstepped and they say something? And it's often when a question like this is missed that it starts to go wrong. So these guides can give you a really good manual to have the systems in place to deal with these issues accordingly. We can get in place operating manuals so that you can stand up a crisis team very quickly, assess the severity of the risk, and clear action plans for how to deal with it. And then also easy to use scripting tools so that everybody can stay on message and everybody can be absolutely clear about what the message is. Just finally, because we're short of time, as a global firm, we have people that specialize in crisis communications around the world and a follow-the-sun model, so we can support you around the clock, working continuously. And we also have an excellent dashboard, the Edelman Command Center, which gives you live reporting updates on how issues are trending around the world. You can track that in English and Arabic, and we can really use that to use data to make really informed decisions. So thank you very much for listening. We've covered the fact that a communications crisis can hit any organization, whether you're a good business or a bad business. Many of the businesses I've worked for have been doing a great job, but they've been under mass scrutiny. We've covered the need for preparation and why that's key, and how to put structures in place. But ultimately, we're here to help business to stay on track so you can get back to business to normal. We've only covered a brief amount in the 10 minutes that we've got, but my details are on the screen, so if you'd like to get in touch or have a word after this session, we'd love to talk further. Thank you very much.